Alright everyone, we are talking about Pauper Midrange Pestilence, which is the older version of the Pestilence deck. So basically, when I started playing in Pauper, there were white, black midrange deck with Guardian of the Guild pack and Pestilence, which was also running Korsky Fisher and Value cards. So after some times, when someone started playing the control-ish version with Pristine Talisman, the midrange version started to be seen less, mostly because cards like Castigated Duress main deck weren't something like more flexible against most matchups. But in my opinion and in my experience, the midrange version is way better. I mean, you have a better matchup against aggressive strategies, and you also have a better matchup against decks like Boros or Faeries, and you aren't really reliant like the control-ish version on Guardian of the Guild and Pestilence, and most times you can win even without drawing Pestilence, Guardian, or you can just sideboard them out and win throughout combat step in a lot of matchups. So, starting from this video, I decided to record a couple of videos about decks that I previously played on Twitch. That the reason is that on Twitch I stream only in Italian, and why not just record a league or even more in English for the people that don't speak Italian. And I decided to start with Orzhov Pestilence because people asked me to play more leagues with Orzhov Pestilence, and as I already said, I truly appreciate the midrange version. So, in my opinion, the Midrange Pestilence deck isn't really bad positioned in the current metagame. It doesn't generate a lot of card advantage compared to the decks running Retro Dispute, but is still good as a deck to interact with the other value decks in the format, and probably is also better positioned against certain decks that aren't relying on card advantage. In example, our ex-roof, also known as Boggles. Let's take a look at the list first. Card view. Alright. So the mana base isn't really nothing. It doesn't change nothing compared to the previous midrange list, but as you can see, there are a couple of choices that you may be curious about. First is running at least 2 copies Ash Barons, and then there's Silver Quill Campus. I think that Ash Barons is just a better way to fix the mana compared to cards like the Silver Queen Campus, or also Basilica, or the other dual lands. So I usually, when I play a deck with a full set of Orzhov Basilica or any other bounce land, I'd like to add a couple of Ash Barons, which can be great as a way to shuffle your deck when you are putting on the bottom of your deck cards that you won't eventually be able to draw later in the game, but it's just a better way to fix the mana in mid-late game, so you can play very specific cards like Pestilence or white costing cards, because this deck is actually white based but it runs more swamps and black lands compared to the white one, because you usually want to have more black mana compared to the white mana due to the presence of Pestilence and also due to the presence of the black removal spells. I'm running 3 copies of Silver Quill Campus instead of the Orzhov Galen Screwed Barons, because we aren't running any more bonus ornament, and I wanted a way to use all my mana and late game to get some advantage. In this case, it's not card advantage, but it by fixing your top deck, you can effectively generate some value by using your mana, and compared to Boros Monarch, Boros Metacraft, which is similar to this deck, you are running at least one extra lands. So basically you have a similar mana base, but you prefer to have more lands because you have less cheap card advantage, because you aren't, for example, running Experimental Synthesizer, and you also have cards like Chinorcitic and Pestilence. I made some little changes due to the print of mostly new Capenna, but also for the presence of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So I previously tried the Dispute in a couple of lists of Midrange Pestilence, but I haven't found it really decisive or important. So with the Deadly Dispute, we are generating a lot of card advantage, but we are forced to run Equal Wellspring. Okay, you can run the Wellspring because you are also running Korsky Fisher, but beside Deadly Dispute, you don't really have any other way to destroy your Equal Wellspring to get advantage. Maybe you can try Course Anti-Fires. Eventually, it would be good to have Course Anti-Fires because, example, from this list, you can just cut 4 copies of Spare Supplies, 4 copies of Inspiring Overseer, and 2 copies of Dawnbringer Cleric to add 4 Dispute, 4 Equal Wellspring, and 2 copies of Course Anti-Fires. And Course Anti-Fires is a core creature which costs 4 mana, and which was used a lot in Pauper until a couple of years ago. And when it comes on the battlefield, if you pay the keycard cost, you can destroy an artifact or an enchantment, and you basically have the same list. But I think that Inspiring Overseer is actually good in this deck, and I also wanted to test Inspiring Overseer because I'm mostly a content creator, and I want to try new cards in decks that I like. So Inspiring Overseer performed really well. It's still a 2-for-1 card. Okay, it doesn't draw 2 cards, but it leaves 1 body on the battlefield while replacing itself, and it's a flying creature, which means that you have a new relevant threat for the deck, and can chain block, get lives, and having Spare Supplies instead of Equal Wellspring can be even better, because since we will not have eventually a lot of way to sacrifice artifacts beside the Deadly Dispute, Spare Supplies can can sacrifice itself by tapping the 2 mana. So it's a sort of tap 4 mana, draw 2 cards. I tried this deck for a 2 pre-list, 2-3 leaks, and the deck performed well. I get a couple of 3-2, and if I remember correctly, also a 4-1. And the deck also performed well enough against Affinity. And in my opinion, this kind of deck can perform even better if you are able to run the correct amount of 8 spells or remove spells, based on which decks you are expecting to face. In this case, for example, I'm not running anymore Prismatic Strands, and Prismatic Strands used to be something like 2 or 3 copies staple in the main deck of this deck, but sometimes I prefer to not run anymore Palace Sentinel and to run instead Throne of the Black Rose. And I also prefer to run 4 copies of Inspiring Overseer and 2 copies of Dawnbringer Cleric instead, I prefer to have Thorn of the Black Rose, which can be better in a metagame filled with Kurmag Anglers and Mirror Enforcers, and also the only deck which probably is still good prismatic strengths right now is Burn, and most times Burn's lists are Rakdos instead of Mono-Red, and I wanted to have Dawnbringer Cleric because most red Metalcraft decks are running 2 copies of makeshift munitions, and Dawnbringer Cleric can be both life gain and an enchantment 8 for makeshift munitions. I cut all the copies of Crypt Rats and the Coin Decay I was running previously, and I also cut as well Golden Egg, mostly because I added the Dawnbringer Cleric and also because I needed 2 extra slots for Inspiring Overseer. I also chose to run Journey Thrower instead of Echoing Decay because there aren't many Swarm decks, and Echoing Decay is a removal spell that performs really well only when there are a lot of green Swarm decks or Burst Bully or Faeries, but against Faeries probably it's better to have more card advantage creatures in form of, for example, Inspiring Overseer. We still have Pestilence, we still have Guardian of the Guildpact, and I decided to add the second copy of Omen of the Dead since I was running only one singleton copy of Omen of the Dead. The reason is that Omen of the Dead is still good, but I'm also running for Inspiring Overseer, so having Omen of the Dead that brings back Inspiring Overseer is better compared to Golden Egg that replaces itself, for example. And Journey to Nowhere can exile one creature, which in my opinion is good when your opponent plays something like 3 copies of Blood Fountain to bring back their Enforcer or Kurmag Angler or Frogmite. In my opinion, this deck is usually favored compared at least to the Pristine Talisman version of Pestilence against Faeries. I always found the Pristine Talisman Pestilence deck really weak against Faeries. Okay, you are running 4 copies of Pestilence, 4 copies of Guardian of the Guildpact, and cards like Castigate and Duress, but in my experience I found that when you counter the card advantage and you are running answers, maybe not in main deck but in the sideboard, you don't really fare odds of control. Against Faeries, most times you win thanks to your recursion, or thanks to or just you force them wasting their answers to your recursion or your pestilence deck or your pestilence, so you then have enough changes to play your other threats and then overcome them in mid-late game. The deck probably is weaker against elves because decks like elves and wolves combo or even goblin combo, you are relying on pestilence and other master animals against them, and for that reason probably most times you prefer to run the Pristine Talisman version instead of the control version if you need to face most times those kind of decks. Against all the other decks, I think that the midrange version is better positioned. My sideboard then is just what decks I'm expecting to face in the MTGO Pauper League. Well, I'm expecting to face a lot of burn, so for that reason I'm running 3 copies of Lone Missionary. As well, I'm also expecting to face at least 1 or even 2 copies of Boggles in leagues or in challenge. So for that reason I'm running 2 Leave No Trace. I think that eventually you can cut Leave No Trace if you aren't expecting to play against Boggles, because Leave No Trace is good only against Boggles, in my opinion. Then we have a couple of cards that I think that having in the sideboard is great whatever of the metagame you are expecting. First, there's Ripping Graves, which is probably the best way to get card advantage for this deck. Then we have 4 copies of Castigate, which alongside Okiba Shinobi can generate a lot of discard effect against the unfavorable matchup. For example, the combo decks like Cycle Storm, or eventually the Ephemerate deck, in example, Familiars, or just Ephemerate. Castigate seems great as a way to deal with their card advantage or their ephemerate lock, or to just force their counterspell so you can resolve your Pestilence, Guardian of the Guild Pact, or whatever threat. And then we have Okiba Shinobi, which I found pretty solid against any value deck. Okiba Shinobi is one of my favorite decks in this kind of pile, and I will also play it whenever the metagame is. I mean, being able to get back a value card, a value creature, and discard 2 cards from a deck was really powerful for a lot of time. Maybe it's not anymore powerful as it used to be, but in my opinion, the card is still pretty good. Then we have 2 copies of Relic of Progenitors, because I think that's important to have alongside 2 Bajuka Box, 2 extra ways to interact with the graveyard of the Ephemerate decks, and can also be relevant against the Cycle Storm, of course. I also prefer to always have cards that are good against Cycle Storm, not because Cycle Storm is much played, but because I truly don't want to lose against Cycle Storm. The deck is pretty annoying. Finally, Ashes to Ashes, which I used to play in 2 copies in the metagame, in the Jund Cascade metagame. Right now, I run only 1 copy of Ashes to Ashes, because Ashes to Ashes was good to deal with the creatures of Jund Cascade, because Jund Cascade, when it comes to card advantage, is weaker compared to Orzhov Midrange Pestilence, but it has bigger creatures, which means that my creatures are truly bad in the combat step. So that means if they are able to resolve a Monarch, then I likely not be able to steal it back. But also Ashes to Ashes is a sort of extra copy of Pestilence, and Jund Cascade, Midrange Cascade was often weak to Ashes and Mass Removal spells, because they just tried most times to float the board with 2-for-1 creatures that replace themselves most times. And Ashes to Ashes, Pestilence, also cards like Kraken Shaman, where we are playing Rakdos Metacraft or Affinity, are good to resolve 1 or more of their creatures, allowing you to have more creatures on the battlefield than them, and then eventually force them to answer your creatures first and not overrunning you. Well, I think we talked enough about this deck. I think this list is pretty good. I will not change anything in near future unless they will print something relevant in Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. So for now I'll go with this list. Obviously I haven't talked about all the cards in the main deck, because in my opinion sometimes it's just better to talk about the general strategy of the deck and certain specific card, and eventually the sideboard slots. I mean, this is the kind of deck you can change a lot of cards and toy around with basically every card you want. For example, you can also try the version of Midrange Pest main deck in Lone Missionary, which is not running the life gain spell, the life gain lands, but in my opinion the value list with Radiant Fountain, Capenna Crossroads, Spurs, and of course Spare Supplies and more value creatures is better, because the life gain centered main deck is good only when you are expecting to face a lot of decks like Burn and Stompy. Okay guys, let's go for the first round. Alright, after taking a while, we are finally able to play our match. So the first hand is cleared on mulligan, and I think we should keep this one. Since I don't have enough mana, I think I'll put on the bottom my keys to the square. We already have Omen of the Dead. If you want some some recursion. Of course, the hand is pretty slow, but at last we have one cast down as a way to interact with the opponent. This deck is clearly not busted as the tier 1 decks that are currently roaming the Pauper format. So we'll have a turn 1 turn 2 Trapping Inspector, followed up by Orzhov Basilica, and then on turn 3 we can play Spare Supplies or Cast Down. At last we have enough card advantage so we can dig in search of lands or any other rounds where value, etc, etc, etc. So let's see what the opponent is playing. Blue Faeries probably, yep. So that's mono blue or Dimir Faeries. Those are both favorable matchup, but we are just relying on how much interaction we find in the first 15 cards of the deck. So often we can just die from mono blue Faeries if they have a start really fast and we are not able to find anything relevant. Okay, so we have two choices. The first one is playing Cast Down to kill their first seer, which is still good, but we can keep the Cast Down eventually if they want to play Ninja. It's probably better to just play Trapping Inspector. So with Trapping Inspector on the battlefield we can jump block their Moonsecret Acre, and then we can keep the Cast Down to kill Ninja of DT Power. I think that the correct choice may be not playing already Cast Down if this is not necessary, because we only have one removal spell in hand. There's a 2/2 Ninja, but we have the Cast Down. Alright, Cast Down here. Silver Quill Campus and attack for 1. Of course, if they play again their free seer and they have the third mana, they can play Special Sprite on my Spare Supplies, but yeah, that will be okay. There's not any fair seer unless they're tapping one extra blue mana for free seer, but that's not Mono Blue Faeries, that's Dimir Faeries, which is even better. I mean, we can still lose to Monarch plus Snap out, but at least we can play a longer game, so probably we will also have much more time to do our stuff. We have a good draw, since we draw on turn 4 Guardian of the Guildpack. So I'm attacking first with Trapping Inspector, there's no reason to not attack here. Also, they don't play Mutagenic Road as they are playing Dimir Faeries and not Mono Blue Faeries. And usually for Guardian of the Guildpact is a pretty safe play against them, since they probably run only one answer, at least game 1 against Guardian of the Guildpact. Guardian of the Guildpact is probably our best card against them, alongside Korsky Fisher and Pestilence, since Guardian of the Guild Pact is protected from everything basically. And now we are in a pretty safe position, but they can still play a Gruma Gangler or still keep their mana open, so we can play spare supplies. I think I'll play first my clue token. I'll work first my clue token. So if I draw a tap the land, for example another bounce land, I can bounce back my Guardian Fountain. Inspiring Overseer. Nice. So they can't kill it with... they can't counter it with Sprite, which is pretty relevant. They already played a turn 2 Ninja of E-Powers, but if they want to play double Spellstutter Sprite on my Inspiring Overseer, it's kind of good for me, since I still have 2 copies of spare supplies and also no one of the dead. Okay, that's a counterspell. That's counterspell for us, and they have an echo indicator getting my Trauma Inspector. So, next turn they'll probably play something like a Charge Edict or Depth of Decay me to kill my Guardian of the Guild Pact. No, they just played Gruma Gambler, which is good. Okay. So I will not attack now. Alright, it was a swamp. I think it's probably better to... Now we had two choices. If we want to play, we can eventually cast first Omen of the Dead targeting my Trauma Inspector, because we can still lose probably, unless we draw something that they can counter with Counterspell, and maybe they don't have Counterspell, but Omen of the Dead seems great as a way to bring back Guardian of the Guild Pact, so I'm just scrying with Silver Campus, and I also have enough mana to cast Omen of the Dead in their end phase eventually. Alright, they're attacking with the Pursuit. No ninja, nothing. Right. Scry. Chinner's Edict. They probably have enough. They probably have at least one copy of Spellstutter Sprite in hand. I think that forcing them to use one Spellstutter Sprite right now to counter my Chinner's Edict is not bad, because we can then resolve at least one copy of spare supplies. And if they don't have a Spellstutter Sprite, we can just straightforward kill Perseer and then still have a flashback removal spells in graveyard. Of course, we don't have yet enough mana to cast Generous Edict from flashback cost, but I think that will be helpful later, since the game is going pretty slow. Right. We are forcing their Spellstutter Sprite. I mean, it can be something like a bad play here, playing Generous Edict, that they can counter it with Spellstutter Sprite, but if we don't force their Sprite right now, then we will not have enough, we will not have any room, any chance to play our copies of spare supplies. They have another Sprite, yes? Yeah. Sure. Alright. Alright. And now they need to draw another ninja, basically. If they don't draw any ninja or Chinner's Edict, they draw Evolving Wilds. We have, I think, now time to find our Pestilence. and then kill all their Faeries. Wow, that's great. So we can play Koski Fisher. If that have an armor spell or another sprite, a counter spell, we can just bring back the Koski Fisher with Omen of the Dead. And yeah, it's irrelevant how we play these first plays. Specialized. Alright. Now they need to find our all spells for my Koski Fisher if they want to attack at the last. They don't have any roll spell? That's great. Wow. Okay, I found a Brainstorm. Of course, Thorn of the Black Rose is pretty useless right now. They have too many flying creatures. If you play the Thor, they just steal the more. So they have found out their cast down, and they're killing my Koski Fisher. I think we will need to play Omen of the Dead when they are not able to do anything. Oh, but they have only one card in hand. So if they have a counter spell, they can just bring back. They can just counter my Omen of the Dead. Wow, cool. That was a good brainstorm. Okay, that's time to draw our Pestilence. I say that Inspiring Overseer is still a great draw here since they don't have any cards left in hand. And there's another Koski Fisher. So Inspiring Overseer is doing very well until now, and I'm pretty happy about this new Capenna card. I found it pretty consistent. Another puzzle. Well, Ullenberg, we will bring back the Raging Fountain. Now the opponent needs to find 2 removal spells. I am still not attacking with Guardian of the Guildpact. We still have more cards in hand than the opponent. We also have a spare supplies. They found a Brainstorm. Okay, but there's no reason to cast Brainstorm if they only have Brainstorm in hand. Another copy of spare supplies. Wow. Let me draw more cards, opponent. Ashbarans is pretty useless. I think I want to cycle first Ashbarans since I have a Custody Square on the bottom of my deck. I have enough white mana, so I'll pick Swamp. I think that is better to play Raging Fountain and then not crack spare supplies since we use better the mana if we first scry with Silver Queen Campus. I guess they will not attack unless they draw. Okay, they probably have drawn a ninja. Oh, they draw a roll spell? Okay. They still have a Brainstorm in that. They still have 2 Brainstorm in that. We're killing one Buster Sprite. Scry. Bottom, of course. We want to scry on the upkeep, I guess. I guess that's a pretty safe top since we can play another Chambla here. So we can block both Gourmet Angler and River of Bolas. We can also prevent them by We can also prevent a Generous Edict or a Depth of Decay targeting my Guardian of the Guild Pact, basically. Alright. We're 2 apart, and we are also cracking 1 copy of spare supplies. Okay. Not much as a problem, since we also have our Thorn of Black Rose in hand, but I think that we need to draw at least 1 extra creature. There's another Thorn of Black Rose, which is fine, I guess. I don't want to scry. I have enough card advantage now. I also want to use all my mana, basically. Alright. I think we will play first the Generous Edict, so they're probably just sacrifice their Ogre of Bolas. I mean, they can also sacrifice their Perseer eventually, but I guess they just want to sacrifice. Oh, well, I probably played wrongly here, because that will be probably better to play first turn of Black Rose, because if they had a counterspell for my first turn of the Black Rose, I will eventually not able to play the second copy of Thorn of Black Rose in the same turn. Eventually, I guess that playing their Brainstorm in their end phase isn't right, since they are not generating enough value from Brainstorm. I guess that playing Snuff Out during my turn isn't really... I think that's okay, yes. Let's see if they have found a ninja also. No ninja. Alright. I'm also cracking spare supplies right now. Another Brainstorm, maybe they have found an Ogre Falls. No Ogre Falls? Weird. Okay. We draw a card. And that's a cast down, which is pretty good. Okay, well, here we can play first Thorn of the Black Rose, because if they have a counterspell, we prefer that they waste it on Thorn of the Black Rose instead of Pestilence, and if they don't have a counterspell, just slam Pestilence onto the battlefield. We kill their sprites, and they concede. Nice. So, as you can see, we have enough time to find our Pestilence, but mostly the most important thing here was Guardian of the Guild Pact, because we didn't really draw any removal spells until this first cast down and this second copy of cast down. And it was really helpful, since it's helped us blocking their Gurmagangler. Alright, what do we need against them? Pesticide. I think that Dawnbreaker Cleric is just straightforward bad. I mean, I'm playing Dawnbreaker Cleric to interact with some enchantment, or against Burn. Against Dimir Faeries is not good. I think that in my sideboard I really want all the Ribbon Graves and Ashes to Ashes. We can eventually bring in Wikibigin Shinobi and also maybe Castigate, since they're not good to deal with their end. Mostly Castigate is good to excite their Monarch, and it can eventually cut Thorn of the Black Rose, since we play it only as a way to counter the Monarch. Basically, this deck is better in the matchup against them if they don't have the Monarch. So before the Fairies started playing Monarch, cutting Monarch was always the right choice in any kitty deck. I mean, not in any Curse Keeping Short deck. The thing that I'm worried the most is not having enough amount of removal spells. We have something like 6 targeting removal spells, and we also have 4 copies of Generous Edict. Probably that's enough, if they don't have a really fast start. I'm not bringing in Relic of Realities for 2 reasons. Fairies appear to not playing anymore a lot of copies of Stormbound Guest, and we are also running a lot of recruitment from the graveyard, so having a Relic of Progenitus as a way to interact with the graveyard would be pretty awkward and troublesome for me, since I will eventually force it to counter my own graveyard recruitment with Relic. I think it's pretty safe to keep this hand, unless they have a 22 count spell stutter sprite on my spare supplies. I just need to draw 1 white mana, which can be... I think it's pretty reasonable to keep the hand. We have a spare supplies, basically, and that's... Spare supplies is just a sort of divination and can be also value engine for Koske Fisher. Okay, Orzhov Basilica. Here I want to play Cast Down instead of spare supplies. We have draw the white mana source, so if you kill the first here, they can't ninjutsu, and they can't also play a spell stutter spray on my spare supplies. And if we play spare supplies, and if they don't counterspell it, we can then on turn 4 play Koske Fisher, bringing back my spare supplies. They probably have a ninja in it. So they're flashing one spell stutter sprite and then ninjutsu it. If they have a ninja, we just play Generous Edict into Koske Fisher. So we are voting removal spells on Koske Fisher, and we are also voting removal spells on Guardian of the Guildpact. Of course, we play first the land, so we can play around Spell Pierce, and then we play Koske Fisher and bring back spare supplies. And as you can see, Orzhov Basilica in this kind of deck is the most powerful land, since it's a sort of card advantage. We missed it, we didn't draw any other land, but since we draw Orzhov Basilica, we are now able to do basically anything. The sorcery speed killed my Koske Fisher? Okay. And... alright. They have a spell stutter sprite, but they're missing a lot of land drops. I guess it's time to play Throne of the Black Rose and beat the Monarch deck. Okay, bringing back Koske Fisher with Omen of the Dead will be eventually good, but we can still play Inspired Overseer or Guardian of the Guildpact. So the first play here is attacking first the Return of Black Rose, of course. But then, if we play Guardian of the Guildpact, they need double removal spells, so they'll probably not steal my Monarch if they just counter Guardian of the Guildpact. So forcing their counterspell is probably the right choice. Alright. And now they'll probably flash one spell stutter sprite to steal my Monarch, but since I have a Guardian of the Guildpact on the battlefield, I'm pretty safe. They're not missing any more land drops. Alright, they probably have a... no, we already killed their ninja. Cast down targeting my Thorn. They also have the Edict. Oh, okay. We can kill the sprite and bring back one creature with Omen of the Sea. 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess that bringing back Whiskey Fisher is pretty safe. The alternative is to bring back Guardian of the Guild Pact, but if I bring back Core, I will still have Omen of the Dead in my hand, and also I want to play the Orzhov Basilica instead of the Guardian Fountain. So next turn I will able to play enough creatures from my from my hand. Bring back Core. I mean play Core, bring back Omen. Since I have a Radiant Fountain and I think we can bring back the Bazooka Bog to exile the Urchinar's Edict. So with this Bazooka Bog we are we are basically we are basically playing a duress on their flashback Urchinar's Edict. We have a lot of card advantage. Unless they have the singleton copy of Omen of the Dead, I think that's pretty safe to play double in Spring Overseer. Uchukabog, exile the Urchinar's Edict. I mean, probably they will not play Urchinar's Edict on their turn, but oh, they have the Coin Decay? Nope, they are casting a Snap Out. And if they want to play a Grimmer Gambler, they just need to tap out. Alright, attack with Spring Overseer first. They know that I have an Omen of the Dead now. That's the second copy of Spellstutter Sprite. They're charm blocking. Omen of the Dead. So we are forcing their counterspell on Omen. Ooh. Use straightforward, draw 3 copies of Sprite, right? Right, okay. That's truly bad. Opponent draw better than me. But at last we draw Pestilence. I'm tapping basically all my mana except 1 white mana, so I can play one. I can play 1 Traveling Spectre if I draw it. If I don't, I can just cycle my Shvarans. It's probably still safe to fetch for black instead of white. Brainstorm into Ogre of Bolas into Brainstorm. Alright, we will play then the second Urchinar's Edict. Right. They likely have another counterspell in hand. Probably it's better to force them countering Pestilence, so we can resolve a Guardian and force them to tap out by our flashback Urchinar's Edict. No counterspell. Maybe they have Depth of the Kami. Your turn, opponent. I'm killing Sprite before the combat. Alright, so we are probably still losing the Pestilence, but at the last we force them to tap out, so if we draw something relevant, for example on Crusade Square, we can bring back a lot of stuff. Or we can just draw another copy of Guardian of the Guildpact, which is still pretty great. So we play Radiant Fountain first, and then I think I want to crack my Clue token. Oh, right. So, ping 3 damage, kill their Ogre of Palace. Then, we will play Traben and Guardian of the Guildpact. And the game I think is pretty won at this time, because we still have Pestilence, we draw another Guardian of the Guildpact out of 3, and thanks to our bloody creatures we draw plenty of cards, and we fought well enough the Monarch. So basically my opponent was enough luck to steal my Monarch, but then thanks to my value creature, thanks to my card advantage, I was able to still win the game. I mean, Faeries has always been weak to Pestilence plus Guardian of the Guildpact, but if you are playing the controlled version, you probably will not have enough answers or enough card advantage to interact with Faeries. So basically, when you are playing Faeries, you don't really fear a lot the control-ish version of Pestilence. Okay, have Prismatic Talisman, they have a lot of removals, they also have these card effects, but these card effects usually aren't necessary, since you prefer to have cards that generate value. And the opponent had double counterspells for my Omen of the Dead. They were able to see 2 copies of Church Edict, and they also flashback at 1 copy of Church Edict. But then we were able to draw enough lands and enough answers or threats. I mean, until now I drew 1 cast down, 2 Church Edict, so only 3 removal spells. And as you can see, sometimes creatures are better than removal spells. Alright, that's the second match of the league. We're starting first. You see that this end is pretty reasonable. We don't really have enough card advantage here. We don't really have enough rolls, which can be pretty sad since we have a Thorn of Black Rose in hand. But I think that being able to play Trauma Inspector on turn 1 and then eventually play turn 4 Guardian of the Guildpact is still good enough. I have a lot of lands, but in my opinion, this end is still pretty solid. Affinity, probably. Alright, so we will play Guardian of the Guildpact or Throne of the Black Rose on turn 3 and just try to steal the game. Affinity is still a pretty bad matchup, but since they don't have Disciple of the Vault or Etug anymore, I think that we can eventually be able to win in some ways. Of course I'll play also Basilica here, and I will not play Inspring Overseer because I want to have 4 mana for the next turn to cast my Thorn of the Black Rose, unless they have double Mirror Powers or something similar. 2 cast, okay. Star, Enforcer, of course. We'll play Inspring Overseer, and there's an Omen of the Dead. Okay, so I guess here the card play is playing Basic Swamp. We will try to find a Pestilence, so we will have the change to kill their creatures. We can chum block one Mirror Enforcer with Spring Overseer, because we are bringing it back with Omen of the Dead, so it's just a way to cycle my Omen of the Dead and trying to not lose so many lives, to try to not lose in late game to makeshift munitions. As usual, they still have 3 copies of Mirror Enforcer in the early game. It's always so annoying to lose to Affinity because they have 3 copies of Mirror Enforcer in the early game. Since we have the basic plans in hand, we can play Spring Overseer with Korsky Fisher, and there's Generosity here, which is, I think, good enough, because we can kill 1 Mirror Enforcer and don't lose so many lives so early in the game. And your draw opponent. I guess you have on Title Dispute, over opponents per game here. Alright. I'm not sure if I want to block, but I have double Korsky Fisher. I block with Traven, since Traven Inspector costs less if I want to bring back with Omen. Basically, there's no third deck able to overcome a triplet of Mirror Enforcer and that Gurig Angler with double Blood Fountain. Another Generous Edict. I guess I'll play Ashbarans, Generous Edict, target them, and we can play Turn off the Kill Pact to Chum block Gurmag Angler. I don't want to Chum block here, because next turn I can play double Korsky Fisher and then try to Chum block Mirror Enforcer. They basically need double Galvanic Blast to kill my to force me to not kill their creatures. Oh, unexpected. I think that first Korsky Fisher can bring back spare supplies, so I can play Radiant Fountain and bounce it back with Orzhov Basilica, play Korsky Fisher, draw with spare supplies, and then play Korsky Fisher and bring back Omen of the Dead. Pretty sick. All my rumble spells and Chum blockers are pretty useless against them. Also, Generous Edict will be eventually good versus big value creature deck. I mean, they're not generating card advantage, but they have a sort of value time, because they're not wasting mana to cast their creatures. And against those decks, usually Generous Edict can do something, since it's a 2-for-1. Oh, right. I should have blocked another Mirror Enforcer. Galvanic Blast me, thank you. I'm not running any Death Dust in my sideboard for a simple reason. I think that the matchup is still so bad that Death Dust is not enough to deal with them, and also their only reach is right now Galvanic Blast, so for that reason I think that it will be eventually better to just interact with their board state with Pestilence and then gain enough life with Radiant Fountain, Spring Overseer, Dawnbringer Cleric to not die from makeshift munitions. Also, we have Dawnbringer Cleric to destroy their makeshift munitions, so usually we will lose if they have a fast start as they just add, or if we didn't draw well in the early game. So we aren't playing cards like Dust to Dust or Artifact Aids, and I'm not also bringing in Castigate because I think that 1/1 Hermal Cells are just bad against a deck that is running something like 16 cards that are divination. For that reason, I'm bringing in Quebec and Shinobi because it's good as a way to force them to be faster at the top deck, and we are also bringing in Relic of Progenitus since we lost to their Blood Fountain. Alright, so what we are cutting against them? I think that we can cut 1 or 2 copies of Guardian of the Guildpact. Guardian of the Guildpact seems pretty bad because their creatures are all their creatures are colorless. Maybe you can cut all of them. Pestilence seems the best way to deal with their board state, since our roll spells are pretty weak most times, and I think that Trauma Inspector isn't good enough to deal with their board. I'm still keeping a lot of Traben because we can ninjutsu it, we can also just jump block. Yeah. I think the best way, the best sideboard plan is probably cutting all my copies of Guardian of the Guildpact and keeping all my removal spells and try to win with Thorn or with Pestilence eventually. Alright. I mean, this end is pretty weak, but we have double removal spells. We also have 1 Pestilence and 1 Omen of the Dead, and we have 3 mana. So, if we draw a Thorn of the Black Rose, or if we draw any value card, we can eventually profit from it. This end is clearly pretty bad against a value deck, but I think it is important to not mulligan too much against them because they clearly have a better early game and late game compared to me, and hard mulligan trying to find value cards is probably not the wisest choice if they are able to find enough card advantage or they have too many creatures. Okay. No Blood Fountain. I think it's correct to play Cast Down because if we draw Monarch, we win eventually. Also, Pestilence seems good enough to deal with their Frogmate if they are playing a list with Frogmate. Alright, no other Enforcers. I guess that playing Kroski Fisher into Shaman Inspector here is the wisest play we can do. And I also play another Swamp, so if they kill my Shaman Inspector, I can bring back the Shaman Inspector with Omen, bounce Omen with Core, and then play Shaman again. I don't want to waste my mana by casting Shaman Inspector now. We will not win through this combat step against them. So it's better to use my mana to cast to draw with my Clue Token. Another Enforcer. Another Enforcer. That's the second time in a row they draw double Enforcer. And what they're doing right now? They're tapping 3 mana. They exiled their Mirror Enforcer to just cast Gurig Angler? No. That's not the best play you can do here. So we will play Pestilence and destroy their board. I mean, we kill the Enforcer, jump block a Gurig Angler eventually, and then play Torn of Black Rose. I'm passing here. I can double block. I have an Omen of the Dead in hand, so I can kill their creatures and then play Omen of the Dead and bring back Traveling Spectre or whatever creatures. Oh! Okay, so as you can see, Makeshift Munitions is still a troublesome card, but this time we are losing to Makeshift Munitions because they had, again, 3 copies of Mirror Courser in the first 15 cards. And that's pretty lame. I mean, okay, you won, but you won. So your play is just flinging your creatures targeting me. Oh, unexpected. And that's the kind of situations when Pestilence is still great in this matchup. Previously, Pestilence was just bad because we had the Prismatic Strands as a way to interact with the board state, but right now alright. So I draw with my Clue token, then go in the end step and ping another damage with Pestilence. I need to, So we are pinging with Pestilence, so we'll just to keep the Pestilence on the battlefield, and your turn opponent, go pew pew, double Galvanic Blast, kill me. Of course, this matchup is still impossible to win when they have Mirror Forcer, Angler, and Makeshift Munitions always. If we have enough lucky, we can kind of be able to win, but if they have all their cards, we can do nothing. Please just Galvanic Blast me. I want to play another round. Oh, thank you for killing me.